Thank you very much for the nice introduction. So in this talk, I'm gonna talk about geometric control and learning on S3 for robotic manipulators. So are you guys all undergrads, graduate students? Mostly? Okay, I guess so. Yeah. So introducing a little bit more about me, myself. So once again, as of the introduction, so my name is Joohwan Seo, and then I'm from Yonsei University, South Korea. So I got my bachelor's degrees and the master's degree in the Yonsei University, and I did my master's with Professor Joohwan Choi at Yonsei University, and then I moved to UC Berkeley and now I'm working with Professor Roberto Horowitz. So this Professor Roberto Horowitz is a professor of Professor Choi. So I went to professor's lab. And then here's the picture from Lake Tahoe at MECC 2023 with like three generation in one shot. So I'm now a fifth year PhD student and I'm in mechanical engineering. So what we are mostly talk about is actually about learning. So as you can see from this Google Gemini's nice demonstration, there are some recent success in the vision language action models. So learning has become the most powerful tool to acquire vision-based robotic manipulation skills. But most of these policies actually obtain from ultra large training data set. So there are some growing beliefs in CS community. So as the LLM, the large language model, has gained a success with with large model and large data, there are belief in the CS guys that large data can also solve the robotics problem. So because of that belief, there are some open like collaborative project like this RTX to build up basically large data set to train the vision language action policy. But still, we need more data. So then what is the problem? What's the problem? Why do we need that much of a data? So I think there is one golden rule that we can agree within each other, that the neural network works in the in-distribution data, but fails at the out-of-distribution data. So therefore, we need to provide as many as variations possible in training the policies. So let's take an example. So for the example, let's say you want to have a policy do that pick up the cup and hanging on the hanger. Then when you are training a data set, what you're going to do is like in this kind of situation, you're gonna do the teleop and make some demonstration. So you have a red cup and then you're gonna put it on the hanger using the teleoperation. But that's not the only one you need. You're going to do more of the demonstration with some background variation, like putting in the bottle or some plates, but that's not the only one you need. You also need to change the shapes of the cup or the color of the cup or shapes of the hanger and the color of the hanger. I want to call this variation as a categorical and background variation. But still, that's not enough. For this kind of set, for this kind of one variation, you also need to change the spatial variation. You also need to change the position of the cup and even the rotation of the cup in this way. So there got this kind of variation, I will call it as a spatial variations, and that's the thing that I am interested in right now. And as you guys notice, this kind of like spatial variation and the category variations is on the like independent axes. So if you consider both of these cases, the training data you need actually grows combinatorial. So that's the reason why you need a lot of data to train the policy. And there are some alternative approach, which is to leverage physics. So in this case, we can leverage the symmetries for the spatial variations. So there is one example work, which is the one I have done 1 or 2 years ago, and that leverages SS3 equivariance, and that is called diffusion EDM. So this diffusion EDM learns a pick and place policy only with the tens of expert demonstration. So this diffusion EDM is given the point cloud, knowing where to pick and place, i.e., it is about knowing the desired goal pose of the end effector, which is given by this G sub D, and that is the element on SE3. And since this utilizes the SS3 equivariance, compared to the previous approaches, which requires hundreds of order of demonstration, it can achieve the pick and place policy with only tens of demonstration. So it can achieve much more sample efficiency. And from the task-wise, if you look into the data set of like Pi0 or RTX like data set, you can actually figure it out. the tasks are often not done with the context-rich task, for example, a assembly task. But and what we say is that, what our argument is that the context-rich tasks are the generalization of some so-called the usual task, in the sense that the policies that can handle the context-rich task can deal with usual tasks, but not vice versa. So we are going to deal with the context-rich task, and we are particularly interested in the Paginot task, which is a classic representation of context-rich task. So this kind of context in the manipulation field is often handled with impedance control. And in our work, we use the differential geometric approach for the impedance control, and that leads to the geometric impedance control. That's the control law I developed. And then, so in short, what we did is to leverage the principles of geometric control and learning, which is invariance and equivariance, to solve the robotic manipulation task. So by using this invariance and equivariance, your trained model will be robust to spatially transform input, and it will be eventually more sample efficient. So then the next question will be, how can we enforce this invariance and equivariance in your model? Okay, having said that, our outline is given by this. So first, I'm going to introduce some concept in geometric deep learning, which is invariance and equivariance. And then for the second part, I'm going to talk about geometric impedance control. And for the third part, I'm going to argue that geometric impedance control is indeed SH3 equivariant control law. And for the fourth part, I'm going to show you some recent work of mine, which is equicontact, which finally encompass the vision to force equivariance in the SH3 domain. And I'll introduce some of the future work. Okay. So the first part is geometric deep learning and invariance and equivariance. So I'm happy to get any questions. So if you have any questions, please interrupt me. Okay. So to describe the geometric deep learning, I want to first give you some example of the conventional deep learning problem. So let's say we want to solve an image classification problem. And to do that, we collect a lot of cat's image to train it. And then you collect the cat's image, you label as a cat, you fed into the neural network. Then during the inference phase, when this kind of cat's image is fed into the neural network will give you the answer, right? Cat. But when this kind of rotated image is fed into the neural network, it might fail. The neural network might not know what to do because this is not in the trained data set. And this is a very typical problem, and a common ways to mitigate this is just by rotating them, make a large data set, all labeled as a cat, and fed into the neural network. But in our sense, this is not good because it has low sample efficiency. It requires increased training time and cost, and the required size of the neural network to memorize all of the data distribution needs to be increased. Then, on the other hand, geometric deep learning does not suffer from this kind of problem. So this is a figure that compares the conventional deep learning and the geometric deep learning. So as you can see, the first column is the input to the neural network, the rotating image. And the second column is the output of the neural network, the feature map. And the third column is still the feature map, but removing the input image's rotation. So for the conventional deep learning case, as your input image rotates, your output feature map also kind of rotates. But even though if you remove the input image rotation, you can see that the feature map is still like changing in a wiggly-ziggly behavior. So if you like attach one more neural network and use it for your downstream task, your model will be vulnerable to the input image rotation because your latent vector changes. But on the other hand, for the geometric deep learning, as your input image rotate, you can make your output of the neural network to automatically rotate. If that is possible, you can obtain this nicely stabilized view if you remove the input image rotation, and that will gonna lead more stabilized neural network or your model. So geometric deep learning can handle this input image's rotation. But you can actually think of this in the other way around. Since your geometric deep learning neural network can already handle with the input image rotation, this means that you don't need to augment the images in the data set by rotating them a lot. So in that sense, you can have a robustness to out of distribution data because you don't need to, this geometric deep learning can already handle the input rotation, and you can increase the sample efficiency as we don't need to augment the data, and you can possibly have a shorter like reduced neural network and a possibly shorter training time. In a short word, you can use less resource, but have more robust performance. So such a changes in the input images can be well described by the group action. So rotation, translation, reflections are all subgroup of Euclidean group is a band. So the knowledge of the group theory and the representation theory can be utilized to build that kind of neural network. And the key concept in here is invariance and equivariance. And I'm gonna focus on the equivariance property. So let's say you have an input image here, you fed into the neural network and you obtain this kind of feature map. And then you rotate the input image, you fed into the neural network, and suppose that you obtain this kind of feature map. So if this feature map is the same as the rotate version of this one, then you call this neural network a equivariant neural network. As the input image rotates, the output image automatically rotates, then that's the equivariance. So this equivariance property is a key property to describe this well-behaving property. So in this field, like proving your neural network or your function or your algorithm to be equivariant is important. Having said that, invariance is much more simpler. Even though your input image rotates, if your output remains invariant, then it's just invariant. So I just like tell you by, I just give you this example by taking only for the rotation, but this equivariance property can be generalized to like any group action actually. So this is a brief introduction of geometric deep learning, and I'm gonna really briefly introduce geometric impedance control. Previously, it has a lot of equations, but like I try to remove as much equations I can. So let's dive into it. So yeah, let's go. So suppose that we have a collaborative / industrial manipulator with at least 6 joints. And then we are normally interested in control of the end effector because, task is anyway done in the end effector space, right? So end effector can move in 6 directions, which is that it has 6 degrees of freedom. So 3 degrees of freedom comes from the translation, and the other 3 comes from the rotation. And this translation rotation combined representation, is called pose of the end effector. So if you say pose, that means that your position and the rotation of the end effector is represented. And normally this pose of the end effector is represented with homogeneous matrix representation, which is given by this matrix G. So this G is 4x4 matrix, and it is element in SE3. So G is composed of RP01, and R is 3x3 rotation matrix, which is again a SO3 group, special orthogonal group. Oh, by the way, SE3 is special Euclidean group. I hope everybody is familiar with this. Yeah, and P is just R3 vector. So G is 4x4 matrix, but only has 6 degrees of freedom, which means that it is on the manifold. And 3D rigid body motions. So what is important in here is that as of the robotics applications, guys, 3D rigid body motion is of our interest for the robotics applications. And this 3D rigid body motion can be well described by the transformation in SS3. So we are going to use the mathematics of SS3 to precisely describe these manipulation tasks. Okay, once again, SS3 group is on the manifold, which means that it is non-Euclidean space. And therefore, the Euclidean error cannot be utilized in the simple control setup. So what I argue on here is that control on the manifold structure should be different. So let's take an example of simplest example, like for example, the PID control in the Euclidean space. To do the PID control, you actually need an error signal, right? But in this case, if your space is a Euclidean space, you can just have it by x minus xd. That's easy. But what I argue in here, this simple error, Euclidean error, cannot be utilized on the manifold. To show that, suppose we have a 2 degrees of freedom robotic arm, and we're going to further assume that this end effector can move only on this circle. So if you just calculate the Euclidean error in here and then just apply the PD control, it is the same as attaching an imaginary spring and damper with one end on there and the other end to the target position. So what I want to say is that since our since our end effector can only move on this circle, which is on the manifold, we should respect this manifold structure and then attach this imaginary spring and damper following the circumference of the circle, not across the circle. So that's our major claim. So which means that the control on the manifold structure, again, needs to be different. And we did that. So we fully respect the manifold structure of SE3 and made the control for the robotic manipulator. And that is geometric impedance control, GIC. So the conventional control in here is called Cartesian space impedance control. So this CIC guys do, what CIC do is that they deal with translation and the rotation of the end effector separately, and they do not fully incorporate S3 manifold structure. And the control law is often defined on the Cartesian space frame, which is the same as fixed spatial frame. So there is a word frame, so there are some word frame, and then the control law is defined on the word frame. And then, but on the other hand, the geometric impedance control deals with SE3 group directly, so it can handle translation and rotation as a unified entity, and it's also formulated on the body frame coordinate instead of the spatial coordinate. So in a nutshell, GIC is just an advanced version of CIC with the same formulation. It's based on the operation space formula, but with the touch of geometric sense, and it can be implemented with a few lines of change from the CIC code. So that is the brief introduction of geometric impedance control, but I want to introduce some important concept in the geometric impedance control, which is lapped invariance. So the error vectors on S3 and the P control action, which is an elastic wrench, in geometric impedance control is defined in this way. So this is a geometrically consistent error vector. I call it as geometric error vector. And this is given by E sub G, which is a function of G and GD. So G is a current end effector frame, and GD is a desired end effector frame. So if you have an end effector in here, and that is your desired end effector, the error vector between these two configurations is defined as geometrically consistent error vector, right? So this is a positional error vector respecting the manifold structure of SE3. So next thing is a P control action. So I call it as elastic wrench, but this P control action shares the same property of this geometrically consistent error vector. So both vectors are lapped invariant, and it's defined on the body frame, which is the end effector frame. So that's the key concept. And I'm going to describe a little bit about the lapped invariance property. So suppose that you have G and GD, and then the error vector in this case is a G is the same as in this case where G and GD undergoes the same lap group action in here. So physically, what it means is that the error vector in this case and the error vector in this case is the same with this case, and it is with respect to the selection of the word frame coordinate. Okay. So this holds for arbitrary elementary sub L. So that is a brief introduction of geometric impedance control. So I'm gonna now show like how can utilize these principles of invariance and equivariance. Okay. Yep. Yeah. For kinematics is known. You can assume that it is not known. Like, yeah, it depends on the selection of the controller then. If you know the full dynamics of the controller, then you can use the impedance control. If you don't know about the dynamics, then you can use admittance control with the four-stroke sensor. But like in theory, in this field, in this background, we assume that the dynamics and the kinematics is known. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yep. Yep. Uh, so so I guess that's the question about what is the difference between the Cartesian space and the geometric impedance control. Yeah. So actually, what they do is that they just separate the translation and rotation. They just separate the translation and rotations. Sorry. They just deal with the translation and rotation dynamics of the end effector separately. That's the old thing. And then they normally utilize the manifold structure of the rotation. So they regard S3 as a P cross SO3. And they just like deal with it separately. So it's a bit different. So Cartesian space control and the geometric impedance control is actually quite engineering term rather than like manifold theory term. So that kind of differences comes from the engineering. Yeah. In the practical sense. Yes. But I think the subspace is the same. It shares the sixth dimension. So it's a matter of like just dealing with S3 as a whole group or just separately handle this. Yeah. Okay. So now we are going to apply this principle of invariance and equivariance to solve the manipulation task, robotic manipulation task. So we are now going to apply this geometric impedance control to the peg-and-hold task, which I mentioned before, which is a classic representation of contact-rich task. So this peg-and-hold task is nothing but putting a peg into the hole. So that's it. That seems quite easy enough, but it is not that easy. And it is still ongoing problem. So normally this kind of peg-and-hold problem is solved using learning variable impedance control, which means that you learn the impedance gains of the impedance control, and you're going to use some learning algorithm and make an adaptation law. So you use the observation from the environment and make a policy that can change the impedance gains of the impedance control. So we do the same thing. We use a naive behavior cloning in a supervised learning fashion to learn impedance gains. So we implemented two impedance gain scheduling policy parameterized by simple neural network. So we trained two neural network, as I mentioned before. So for the first neural network, we fed the geometric error vector in the first neural network and outputs the impedance gains. For the second neural network, we fed the Cartesian error vector and it outputs the impedance gains as well. And the problem scenario in here is that in this default case, you run the expert demonstration, collect the data set, and then train the policy. And what we are going to do is to test those trained policy directly on this highly perturbed cases, like this case 1 to 3, which is highly translated and highly like rotated, to test for the zero-shot transferability. And the problem in here is that the gain scheduling policy based on the Cartesian space formulation is normally not transferable. As you can see from this table left-hand side, even with the 6 degrees of tilting, the naive approach's success rate drops quite significantly from 100 to the 6.7%. So when geometry is not considered, the success rate drops quite dramatically. And the typical approach to mitigate this is use domain randomization, which is nothing but the data augmentation. So basically, you randomize not only the initial pose of the end effector, but also the pose of the hole. But once again, in our sense, this is not good. So one note in here is that all of the goal poses, which the pose of the hole is already known. So before introducing our result, I'm going to clarify the definitions. So our proposed approach is called as GIC plus GCB. So I call this because I first utilize the geometric error vector. I first calculate the geometric error vector. I fed into the gain scheduling policy, obtain the impedance gains, and then run that impedance gains with geometric impedance control. So what I have to emphasize that impedance gains is just gains. It means nothing without the control law. So I utilize this GCB and then run it with GIC. So that is called GIC plus GCB. And the second, the benchmark approach is that I use Cartesian error vector, fed into the neural network, obtain the impedance gains, and run it Cartesian space impedance control. So that's called CIC plus CB. So if you look into the result, so both of the approaches showed perfect success rate in the training case, which is desirable. But interestingly enough, our proposed approach, when those are tested on the perturbed cases, it was almost perfectly transportable, but the benchmark approach was not transportable at all. And I hope to emphasize that this result is obtained without any domain randomization. So then, how is this possible? So the first reason we can find is the difference between the input to the neural network. So unlike the Cartesian error vector, the geometric error vector is lapped invariant error vector. So that leads to lapped invariant policy, and that increases the learning transferability. So we can say that the key factor is a lapped invariant gain scheduling policy. But what is the meaning of lapped invariance? I introduced this from the beginning, but we can repeat it one more time. So suppose we have a peg and the hole, and the geometric error vector in this case is the same when this peg and hole, GNGD, undergoes the same groove action, G sub L in this case. So the geometric error vector in this case and the geometric error vector in this case is the same. So that's the meaning of lap invariance. And we can actually analytically prove that this geometric error vector is lap invariant and this Cartesian error vector is not lap invariant. But how is that connected to the learning case? So suppose in the training case, you have a fixed pose of hole, and then you're going to initially randomize where around this hole so that your neural network can experience this ample distribution of E sub G around this hole. And then in the execution phase, even though hole is tilted in this way, as long as your peg is initially near this hole, your neural network will gonna encounter the same data distribution because the geometric error vector in this case is the same as the geometric error vector in this case because it is lap invariant. So once again, this does not happen with the Cartesian error vector. So we can really say that this lap invariance removes out of distribution issue. So we can say this lap invariant gain scheduling policy is really a key to the learning transferability. So then the naturally arising question is that what's gonna happen if we run this gain scheduling policies with a different combination of the control law? So before we run this geometric error vector-based gain scheduling policy with the geometric impedance control and the Cartesian error vector-based gain scheduling policy with the Cartesian space impedance control. So what will gonna happen if we swap this relation? So this first connection, we're going to call it as GIC plus CB, and the other connection, we're going to call it as CIC plus GCB. Hypothesis. If the lap invariant gain scheduling policies is all we need to describe learning transferability, then CIC plus GCB will gonna be transportable because these GCB-based gain scheduling policies is lap invariant, but GIC plus CB will not be transportable. But if you look into the result, interestingly enough, CIC plus GCB was not transportable at all, but GIC plus CB was not that perfect as before, but it is somewhat transportable. So a obvious conclusion in here is that the lap invariant gain scheduling policy alone is not enough, and we require a more fundamental reason to describe this, which is a change of forces direction. So this elastic wrench F sub G, which is a P control action in the geometric impedance control, is the main driving force that pulls the peg into the hole. This is a P control action anyway. So as I mentioned before, this F sub G is lap invariant and it's defined on the body frame coordinate. So as you can see, this F sub G, coordinate of F sub G is, if you look into the body frame, it is the same. But if you look into the perspective of the spatial frame, as the GNGD undergoes the lap groove action, the direction of F sub G changes, and that implies the equivariance property. And that is our main proposition, the equivariance of the geometric impedance control law. So if someone is familiar with the equivariant dim learning, then you can see that this one is actually the exact definition of equivariance. So if I only going to show the proof, then the result of the proof, this superscript S denote that this vector is defined on the spatial frame. And the G sub L multiplied on the left-hand side of its argument can be factored out by the autojoint GR inverse transpose. And this autojoint GR inverse transpose is the representation on the wrench domain. So that's the proof. So we can indeed verify that geometric impedance control is SS3 equivariant control law. So now the fun part comes in. So far, we have looked into this combination study of geometric impedance control, the types of controller and the input to the neural network. What I want to reveal in here is the relation between the selection of the observation and the actions. So what we did in this case is that we look into the relation, we look into the effect of the selection of the observation. So for the observation, we require a lapped invariant observation for the overall policy to be transportable. And for the actions, if you remember, geometric impedance control is defined on the end effector frame, and Cartesian impedance control is defined on the word frame. Therefore, your selection of the policy representation also affects on the learning transferability of the policy. That is the main conclusion. So from this study, we can reveal the principles to build the SSG equivariant policy generalized. So the first condition we require is actually a lapped invariance, which means that your observation, your input to the neural network needs to have some property related to the lapped invariant. And for the second condition, the policy the policy should be defined on the end effector frame or to have an induced equivariance. But if you look into this, actually this is related to the local observation and local actions. So lap invariance. So when I talk about the lap invariance, I always talk about G and GD. And then this error vector is the same as this error vector is the same. Because, the physical meaning of lap invariance is that the entity does not depend on the selection of the spatial frame, which means that I am only interested in the relative differences between two frames, not the information on the word frame. So lap invariant observation actually means localized observation. And this policy defined on the end effector frame also means local action. So that's the key of this talk. So locality is actually a key for the spatial generalization. And if you satisfy this lap invariance and definition on the end effector frame, you can further achieve equivariance as well. Okay, so that's the highlight. Okay. Mm-hmm. From the non-expert perspective, our the limitations, but the limitations that this may not So the key limitation, so I'm going to show this in the next slide, but the key limitation is on the vision actually. So in the vision, you actually need the representation to be lap invariant. You know what I mean? The output of the vision encoder needs to be lap invariant, which means that I don't have a material to describe this. Yeah, I don't have a material to describe this, but to give you a high level idea. So if you look into this like bottle and your camera looks into this bottle, and then like your vision encoder outputs a representation vector. And the lap invariance property, what it means is that even though the bottle is placed on its ground, your vision representation should be the same, which means that your vision encoder only needs to focus on the object of interest. That is hard. That is really hard. That is really hard. It is ongoing field, still ongoing field. So how to buy equivariance from like, not from the point cloud, from on the vision is really hard. Point cloud is, yeah. Yeah, it is the point cloud, like there is a well-developed theory on the geometric deep learning on the point cloud issue, point cloud. But the problem of the point cloud is that it has a lot of defects. There are some shading effects, there are some missing point clouds, and then they were gonna break the equivariance. And also the latency is really slow because we cannot do the real-time control with the real-time feedback with the point cloud. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Short answer, I'm not a vision guy. So I'm a roboticist, control-based roboticist. So I pick up the vision model and utilize that. But yeah, that's out of my field. Sorry about that, but that's out of my field. And also like that's what's it called? Nerve. It's also kind of one candidate. Yeah. So I'm gonna introduce equicontact on the final part, which is a SS3 vision to force equivariant policy. So far, I assume that the pose of the hole is already known. Pose of the hole is already known. But like in real life, that will not gonna happen. So we need to estimate it from the vision. So we are going to solve the Paganel problem using vision. So we basically made this system setup. It requires like, I made this setup by myself alone, and it requires like 1 year to finish this setup. And then we have two external cameras, which is RGBD, utilizing time of flight. And we have two hand-eye camera, wrist cameras. And there is a force torque sensor attached it. And then we utilize Euromecha robotics. So the task is to pick up the pack and place it and insert it onto hole with the known pose is assumed. And not by myself, actually, like the half of 6 months, like I work with my our group's new students. So naively, what we can do is to basically utilize the diffusion EDF and the GIC plus GCB. So given the point cloud, the diffusion EDF, if you recall the diffusion EDF, it was the algorithm that given the point cloud that outputs the desired pose of the end effector G sub D. And GIC plus GCB, if you remember, it is the algorithm that given the desired pose of the end effector, it outputs the force interaction F sub G. But like, so you can just put it in together. So given the point cloud, you fed into the diffusion EDF, obtain the goal pose of the end effector, you fed into the gauge scheduling policy, and then run it with the geometric impedance control. So this half is equivariant, and this half is equivariant. So if this works, the full pipeline will be equivariant. But result is that it is not working. The problem of the diffusion EDF is that it is not that accurate enough. So if I test the error of the diffusion EDF on the training data set, the translation error is about 5 to 25 millimeter, and the rotation error is about 0 to 15 degrees. And our tolerance for the Paganel task is 1 millimeter. So we cannot use this approach. So our conclusion is that we require a middle layer policy that can do the real-time feedback to fix this error. So we need some real-time vision-based feedback, and that is our equicontact algorithm. So if I introduce the equicontact is a hierarchical, provably S3 vision to force equivariant policy. And given this policy is hierarchical, it is composed of the high-level planner, which is a diffusion EDF, that is SS3 equivariant point cloud model, and the other part is a low-level visual motor policy, which is geometric compliant ACT. So the high-level vision planner provides a global reference frame for the low-level policy to anchor on, and the low-level visual motor policy utilizes the localized information and outputs the localized action. So this can be considered as a localized policy. And also, it gets the real-time images and state feedback and outputs a fine-grained compliant motion. So this is the block diagram. So given the scene of the point cloud, the diffusion EDF handles it, outputs the reference frames for the geometric compliant ACT. And then G-compact gets the real-time state and wrist camera feedback and output the desired pose and the admittance gains, which are now then followed by the geometric impedance / admittance control. So this has this hierarchical structure. So the overall idea is very similar to the previous case. In the training phase, we fix the pose of the hole, and then we are going to randomize the initial pose of the end effector around this hole so that it can like learn the localized policy. And in addition, we actually give the information of the reference frame for this localized policy to act on. And then in the inference phase, what we need to do is we need to just have an estimation on the reference frame and then fed into the low-level policy. And since the low-level policy is already local, it will be perfectly arguably perfectly transportable. Yes. So I call this like canonicalization as an anchoring localized policy on the globally estimated reference frames. So this is a key idea of the equicontact. Yep. So it's a metaphorical. It's a metaphorical. So my imagination is like this. So we have a ship. It knows how to go, but like it knows how to work on the sea. And you are like anchoring this ship on certain place so that it could do the job. Yes. It's metaphorical. And we are going to call this situation as an in distribution, and we are going to call this case as out of distribution in the sense that the geometric compliant ACT was not trained, is not explicitly trained on this case. But if you understand this, actually in the context of geometric compliant ACT, our policy, the two tasks are the same task. So how can you make the localized policy? So the selection of the observation and the action of the geometric compliant ST is as follows. So G-compact is based on the action chunking transformer, which is like Aloha mobile algorithm. And then for the observation, we get the geometrically consistent error vector E sub G, where this G sub EDF comes from the estimation of diffusion EDF. And then we fed the force torque sensor value in the end effector frame, and we fed the images from the wrist camera. So these observations are all defined on the end effector frame, so you can call it as local. For the action, you output the chunk of relative desired pose. So this pose of the end effector, these poses are defined with respect to the current end effector frame. And then it also outputs the admittance gains. So this is observation action, and those observation actions are all local. So we can call this as a localized policy. And from this design choice, we can prove that equicontact is S3 equivariant from the vision to control force level. Under some assumption, of course. One of the key assumptions I need to make was the lab invariance of the visual features, which are hardly met in the many scenarios. So we need more study on that. But if I give you some idea about that, one possible option is to embed with the language. Yeah, because, yeah. Exactly, that will also work. That will also work. But like, so I utilize I'm currently doing a revision of this work, and then some of the reviewers ask about the same questions. And then I propose the language embedding idea. The language embedding idea is the same as the SEM segment anything model. It's the same because we want to output some patches that we are interested in from the language embedding. Yes. So yeah, in this paper, we actually propose the principles for spatially generalizable contact-rich task. So for this spatially generalizable, if you follow my presentation, the key two property was the localized policy, and this is induced equivariance, and this compliance is to handle with the contact-rich task. And to show this, I prepare 3 benchmark policies. The one is just regular ACT with the observation and action given in the word frame poses, but these poses are executed with the non-compliant control. For the second benchmark, it is the same ACT, but it is just running with the compliant control, but with the fixed gains. The third one is the compliant ACT, which uses the force torque sensor as of its input and outputs the admittance gains so that this compliant control is run with the variable gain. So if you look into the result, I utilize the same ACT just running it with and without the compliant control law. And if you look into the success rate, without the compliance, the success rate is 2 out of 10, but just using the compliant control, the success rate becomes 100%. So we can really see that this compliance is almost a decision factor for success on contact-rich task. And the second is the compliant ACT, and it's the variable gain and the fixed gain case. So although the success rate is almost the same, if you look into the interaction force profiles, the compliant ACT, which uses the variable gains, shows lower interaction forces compared to the ACT with fixed gains. So compliance gain. So once again, compliance is almost a decision factor. So this is a failure case of like non-compliant controller. So you just go there, bump it, and the collision is detected, and then the system stops. So that's the failure mode of the the ACT without the compliant control. But on the other hand, compliant ACT do the job pretty well. So compliant ACT, which is good. It can achieve low interaction forces, and also like it can successfully do the job. But the problem is that when it is tested on the out of distribution cases, it fails perfectly as expected. So since this algorithm does not have any equivariance property, the success rate is 0. But on the other hand, our equicontact, even though since it is like equivariant from vision to force, even though it's flat or it's tilted, it can do the decent job on the out of distribution cases. So we can once again conclude that the equivariance is a key for the spatial generalizability. And here is the equicontact in action. So it first goes there, go to the pack, and then pick up. And successfully inserted. Yeah. So takeaway. So I propose a principles to obtain spatially generalizable policy for contact-rich tasks. First is a compliant, second is a localized, and third is an induced equivariance. So, but from the beginning, I argue that the contact-rich tasks are the generalization of a usual task. So if that is really true, these principles can be directly applied to the usual task without considering contact-rich tasks and the compliance. So that's the main takeaway. And then that provides some of the reasons why nowadays VLA has limited spatial generalization. The VLAs nowadays have a global frame representation of the policy, and then it partially utilizes the local information from the risk camera. So maybe that's the reason why it has limited spatial generalization. And one note in here is that we did not put some modification on the model, right? We did not argue anything about the model. So ACT can be replaced by the visual motor policy, which is diffusion policy. But we have tested, actually. We utilized a diffusion transformer, and it was not working. Yeah, diffusion transformer is too fragile. It's really fragile. When the vision is a little bit offsetted, it fails. Yeah. So the vision condition on the diffusion policy needs to be much more strict. But so diffusion policy is really fragile, but it can handle multimodality. And ACT is really robust, but it cannot handle multimodality. So there's like pros and cons for this. And we are also interested in like combining together how to get the best of both two worlds. Okay. And diffusion EDF can be well replaced by the other pick and place methods, such as from the point cloud, such as, you know what, yes. And one argument I want to make is that we did not use any equivariant neural network, but we achieved the equivariance from the choices of observation and actions. So equivariance neural network has its own problem. So equivariance neural network, the theory is nice, but the problem is that it is too hard to understand, first of all. And it is not a mainstream. So it is not well engineered as a transformer library, for example. So it has a computation problem. So if you just implement the off-the-shelf equivariant neural network, it will be really slow, actually. Yes. So it is not well engineered. It is not maintained by the large group as a PyTorch or just transformers. Okay. So using this idea is very simple, and you will not lose anything by adopting this. So why not using this? That's my main claim. So for the final part, I'm going to introduce some future works. Okay. So I'm going to what I'm interested in is to generalize to the other kinds of tasks. So talk history proof is hard. So we are actually doing some screwing task right now for the revision and for the surface wiping task. And we need to really demonstrate that our framework is generalizable to other tasks and to the complex assembly task, which requires long horizon. And we are also interested in adding sensor modalities such as tactile information. Tactile information has its own problem. Nowadays, tactile information is often handled by the vision encoder. But if you add one vision encoder to the model, the training time is increased by the linear scale. So that's not good. If you have 5 fingers, you have two vision encoders for this ACT. But if you have 5 fingers, you're going to need 7 vision encoders. That's not good. We need some way to deal with this tactile information. And I'm also interested in biomanipulation tasks. What I'm interested in is like how we're going to supply, if we are going to formulate into the centralized manner or in a decentralized manner, and what about the equivariance property? And I'm also interested in the humanoid. So biomanipulation, humanoid task. Biomanipulation is well done by the imitation learning, and walking is well done by the reinforced learning, but they are done only separately. Why not together? So I believe the main reason here is that there is no well-working whole body controller here. So for example, there is no well-working end-effector controller algorithm on the moving base case. So what I am thinking of is to develop a control theoretic controller for the arms when the robot is walking, when the base frame is moving. So I guess that's it. Thank you very much. Was it a little bit heavy? Which can be considered as lab invariant, yes. Okay, so the key idea in here is that this is photo, even it's here, or even it's there. So that's the main idea. So the length, so if you run like, for example, clip with, and get the visual features out of the clip, the visual features from this, in this case, the visual features output from the clip in this case is similar to the clip in this case. That's my lab invariance. And you can utilize some film-based method to guide it. Yeah, it worked actually. It worked. For the vision fragile cases, the success rate for not utilizing this language embedding was 2 out of 12. But as long I just implemented a simple clip-based method, and the success rate increased to 7 out of 12. Yeah. Yeah. So how should I say this? I think the lab invariance. So lab invariance means that it is the same. It outputs the same thing. The resulting value is the same, even though if it is here or if it is there, right? So language to be the lab invariant just means that you are fetching the same language input. That's my understanding. Yeah. How can he guide the controller using language? So, yep. Yes. That's too ambitious question for me. Well, we have many ways to guide the language features to be, I mean, we have many ways to like guide the output of the neural network using language embedding, right? The one way is just using film, once again. I think that's all I can imagine. I need to dig into this. Yes. Yep. Okay. So so for the pick and place manner, so I will not I will first like reduce our domain for the pick and place so that I can answer something. So in the pick and place in the diffusion EDF, there is so another equivariance which is called right equivariance. They that take cares of the relative pose between the grass object and the end effector. So for example, you output the desired pose of the end effector of the desired pose of the end effector. So for example, if you grasp the peg in this way, then your outputted desired pose should be not like this, but should be this. So that can be handled by another concept of equivariance, but then that it will require. So when you are grasping with are you considering hand, for example, with grasping hand? Yeah, that's hard. But one starting point can be from right equivariance. That is called right equivariance. Yes. But it only holds for the point cloud from the point cloud perspective. And right equivariance was not on my concern in my case. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, that's really hard question and needs to be handled from when we are going to use the hand, robotic hand, right? Yep. Yep. Post signal, some kind of. I did not. Yes. Yeah, just concatenate. But if you look into the ACT model, it just first projected to the 512, which is a token size, and then it's just handled directly. I don't feel that that is too good because it is like the 6-dimensional data is lifted to the 512, and that means almost random signal to me, but it magically worked. Yes. On the other hand, the vision input is actually reduced. I don't know. But like I just utilize the ACT. I just utilize the ACT model. I think it's stupid. Sorry. That makes no sense to me. No, that makes no sense to me. You have forward kinematics. That's the most accurate information you can obtain from the roboticist. If you cannot do the forward kinematics, you should not call yourself as a roboticist. That's my opinion. Yes. You have a forward kinematics. Why do you use joint space? But joint space had its good points, of course. It cannot consider, you don't have to consider about the singularity problem. Actually, singularity is a big problem in here. Singularity, when the robot goes to singularity, the symmetry breaks down. So when the robot goes to the singularity position, then the robot cannot go there actually. And that leads the, what is it called? The problem in the behavior cloning, what is it called? Distribution shift. Yeah, so it breaks down. Symmetry breaks down. So that's the good point of the joint space. Yeah. But then we still don't have a good measure to solve the singularity. So in that case, yeah, joint space is good. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.